Midsummer, and the market square will not stay still. Hundreds of bodies turn in the dust, arms flailing, feet worn raw inside their shoes. Pipers and drummers play from a hastily built wooden stage while the cathedral bell tolls above them. Some are laughing, most are screaming. None of them can stop. To understand how a city arrived at this, rewind 7 weeks to a place that considered itself blessed. Strasbourg, in the summer of 1518, a free imperial city on the Rhine, wealthy in wine and grain, crowned by the tallest spire in Christendom. From a distance, nothing seemed wrong. Inside the walls, the picture was different. Years of failed harvests had emptied the countryside into the streets. The price of grain had climbed higher than anyone living could remember. Beggars slept in doorways along the cathedral's flank. Hunger had become the ordinary weather of the city. Hunger traveled with worse companions. Smallpox and syphilis moved through the alleys. Leprosy had its houses outside the gates, and plague returned as it always returned. Death here was not an event, but a season. And to a frightened people, suffering was never merely medical. In the middle of July, on a narrow lane, a woman stepped out of her house and began to dance. Chroniclers later gave her a name, Frau Trophia. There was no music, no festival, no reason. She simply moved into the open, lifted her arms, and started. She danced through the afternoon. Neighbors laughed, then watched, then fell silent. Evening came, and she did not stop. Sweat soaked her dress. Her face, witnesses said, showed no pleasure at all. When darkness fell, she was still turning in the street, alone. She collapsed only when her body failed, slept briefly, then rose and danced again. Accounts say this continued for days. Her husband pleaded with her. She could not answer, or would not. Something had taken hold of her limbs, and she had no say in it. At last, she was loaded into a wagon and carried into the hills, to a shrine of St. Vitus, where the afflicted were brought to be cured. The city exhaled. The strange business was over. Within days, it had begun again, and this time, not with one. A second woman took up the dance. Then a man. Then a household. They came out of workshops and tenements into the sunlight and began to move, silently, endlessly, as if answering something the rest of the city could not hear. Within a week, some 34 people were dancing in the streets of Strasbourg. They were not drunk. They were not celebrating. Many wept as they moved. Bystanders tried to hold them down, and found the limbs fighting back with a strength that outlasted every attempt. The city council met in emergency session. Strasbourg was a governed place, proud of its order. Guilds, courts, ordinances, records kept in a careful hand. Now its magistrates faced something no ordinance covered. So, they did the reasonable thing. They sent for the physicians. The learned men examined the afflicted and delivered a verdict grounded in the medicine of their age. This was not sin, they said, and not demonic possession. It was overheated blood, a natural imbalance of the humors, a fever of the body that had risen into the limbs. And there was a logic to the cure that followed, if you accepted the premise. Overheated blood had to be worked out of the body. The sufferers must not be restrained. They must dance day and night until the fever burned itself away. So, the city opened itself to the affliction. 2 guild halls were cleared for the dancers. The horse market and the grain market were given over to them. Carpenters raised a wooden stage in the open air. Strasbourg, in its wisdom, built a theater for its own disaster. Musicians were hired at public expense. Pipers, drummers, fiddlers, to keep the rhythm going. Strong men were paid to walk among the dancers, holding them upright, moving their arms and legs when they faltered. The treatment had become a machine, and it never stopped. It did not cure them. It recruited them. The drums carried across the rooftops and drew others out of their homes. What the council had built as a hospital had become an invitation, broadcast day after day into a starving, terrified city. By some accounts, the number reached 400. 400 people moving in the squares of a city of perhaps 20,000. Visitors came to stare. Country people arrived at the gates to see it. And in the middle of it, the dancers went on. Witnesses did not describe joy. They described faces slack with exhaustion, eyes fixed on nothing, mouths open. Some begged for help while their bodies refused to obey them. Their shoes wore through, their feet split. Still the rhythm held them, hour after hour, in the heat. Then, the dancers began to die. Chroniclers of the time recorded deaths from exhaustion, from strokes, from hearts that simply gave out under the strain. How many? No reliable record tells us, but it was enough that Strasbourg understood at last that its cure was killing people. The council reversed itself entirely. The stages came down. The musicians were dismissed. Public dancing was forbidden across the city, on pain of fine, and the drums that had driven the affliction were silenced altogether. The magistrates went further. Gambling was banned. Prostitutes were driven out. If the affliction was a judgment, the city would scrub itself clean. Where music was still permitted, only strings were allowed. Quiet instruments, nothing that could set a foot tapping. And then Strasbourg turned to the saint. The dancers were gathered and carried in wagons up into the mountains above Saverne, to a grotto shrine where Saint Vitus was said to hold power over the affliction he sent. It was a procession of the possessed, winding uphill. In the dim chapel they were led before a wooden image of the saint. Each was given a pair of red shoes, anointed with holy oil, marked with crosses on the tops and the soles. Mass was said over them. They were walked around the altar, blessed, and sent home. And by the beginning of September, it was over. The streets went quiet. Whether the ritual healed them, or exhaustion did, or the turning of the season, or simply the removal of the drums, no one then could say, and no one since has proved it. Strasbourg went back to its business, as cities do. Wine was sold, cases were heard. The cathedral bell kept its hours above the roofs, but the clerks had written everything down, and it is because of their diligence that the summer of 1518 did not vanish. This is what separates the dancing plague from folklore. It survives in municipal orders, in the notes of physicians, in sermons, in chronicles kept by men who had no reason to invent it. Bureaucracy is a poor liar. Something genuinely happened in those streets. Nor was it the first time. In 1374, after catastrophic flooding along the Rhine, crowds had danced through Aachen and Cologne and beyond, screaming, convulsing, calling on saints. The Rhineland had seen this before. Strasbourg's outbreak was the last great one and the best documented. So what took hold of them? One answer has long been ergot, a fungus that grows on damp rye and can poison whole villages, bringing convulsions and burning hallucinations. But ergot poisoning constricts the blood and ruins the limbs. It does not let you dance for days. The explanation most historians now favor is stranger and more human. Mass psychogenic illness. Extreme, sustained stress in a population that already believed a saint could strike them with uncontrollable dancing. Belief opened the door. Terror walked through it. The body did the rest. 8 years later, the physician Paracelsus came to Strasbourg, read the accounts, and rejected the saint entirely. He blamed imagination and the mind's power over the flesh. He gave the condition a name of his own. He did not, in the end, explain it either. 5 centuries on, no theory closes the case completely. What remains is the image itself, a city that watched its neighbors dance until they dropped, and could think of nothing better to do than hire more musicians. We would like to believe we would have known better. Strasbourg believed that too.